Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. And spoiler alert, we're going to have another special edition tonight where we're primarily just going to focus on everything going on with the Trucker Freedom Convoy 2022. So if somehow you've been, hiding under a rock, you haven't watched any of the last week's episodes of the Maple Pill, giant protest went on in Ottawa in regards to essentially Canadians just being fed up with vaccine mandates. In my opinion, and I don't think I'm alone in this, there's been a lot of misrepresentations, a lot of misinformation, maybe even some false flag operations. We'll get all into that and more on tonight's episode. But before we even get into kind of updating on what's going on with the truckers, I actually just wanted to read to you guys a post I recently put up on my Instagram stories and just wanted to frame why I think this is so important. Not necessarily just this protest, but what's going on in regards to, the mainstream corporate press, legacy media, whatever you want to call them, and their refusal to really just report on the facts, but constantly focused on giving it a narrative rather than just, being dispassionate. They want to present themselves as if they're the unbiased media, and yet they're just as biased as any other individual. And I find that extremely frustrating. So with that being said, again, if you guys are watching this, if you guys attended the Ottawa protest, let me know what was your personal experiences in the comment section. A lot of you have been DMing me on Instagram and sending me messages on Telegram and Discord and stuff like that. So I really do appreciate those messages. Keep them flowing because it's a really interesting time and it's a very difficult time to actually understand WTF is going on in the world, let alone here in Canada. In my opinion, essentially, we're witnessing a cultural civil war. At this time, I cannot foresee this cultural tear being healed. It's Joe Rogan versus censorship, unacceptable views of a fringe minority versus Trudeau. It's reality versus the corporate legacy media's narrative. One side believes in free will, individualism, and the pursuit of truth. The other believes in obedience, collectivism, and the greater good. There are serious consequences when a significant portion of a population loses trust and faith in institutions. A high trust society breeds prosperity. A low trust society breeds austerity and scarcity. Taken to extremes, a high trust society is peaceful and stable. A low trust society is violent and unstable. A high trust society can only exist at length, in my opinion, in an environment of free speech. And it's my belief that the political class will no longer tolerate dissent, and we will see a continued erosion of trust in our society. In my opinion, regardless of which side you're on, whether you're pro-truckers, anti-truckers, whether you're pro-mandates, anti-mandates, I think a lot of us are starting to realize that the narrative's not as clean as being presented to us in mainstream media. And if it wasn't for alternative sources of news, if it wasn't for individual citizen journalists, a lot of this appears like it potentially would just be swept under the rug. And that only creates more frustration at the system. It only creates more resentment. And I think that actually is what leads to violence. And so I was really happy to see that this entire weekend essentially seemed to go overall without a hitch. There was no arrest during it. Again, we're going to get into a bunch of different stories. I'm going to share some comparisons of what's going on. In my opinion, I'm going to be highlighting some of the hypocrisy from the corporate press, as well as just from certain political pundits and things of that nature. Again, the reason I highlight these hypocrisies isn't to state that I'm perfect or my side's perfect. I don't even think I've got a perfect side in this regard, simply because I'm just anti-government in general. So this entire experience has probably the last 2 years has taken me from a very freedom-oriented libertarian to pretty much a full-blown anarchist, because I just can't see how I can trust any institution or any government or any individual to make my decisions for me in my best interest. I really believe it should be left up to me. But again, you guys may disagree with that, and that's fine. But as always, in tonight's episode, in the video description down below, you'll find links to every single story, every single Twitter post I'm going to share with you. And I'm just really excited to be covering this, and I appreciate all of you that are sharing this on social media, because we both know that big tech is going to do us no favors in regards to the algorithms. And this show doesn't need to get hundreds of thousands of views. It doesn't even need to get 1,000 views. To me, it's really just about you guys understanding, and even me understanding, we're not alone in our pursuit of truth. There actually are individuals still that just care about trying to figure out WTF is going on in this world. I'm one of them, and I appreciate those of you that are also in search of the truth. So let's jump into it, get our screen share going here. And the first thing I just wanted to play for you guys, this is a little clip. And again, link in the video description down below. But this was one of the many pieces of drone footage from this weekend. Again, just highlighting some of the protesters, some of the trucks. And certainly it appears that it's more than just a fringe minority that decided to show up in Ottawa this weekend. Again, estimates vary drastically. I think probably one of the more reliable or potentially more reliable estimates is 8 to 15,000. I believe that's what the Ottawa Police Services was claiming. I know others were saying 60,000. I've seen others say that it was barely 1,000 people. Now, certainly this drone footage alone, to me, appears like there's certainly more than 1,000 people there. Again, exactly how many people, I think, is left to interpretation because there's not exactly pollsters going around doing head counts. At the same time, I think something that does stand out to me is the fact that it appears that the main protest was certainly a lot larger than any counter protests that showed up. In fact, I barely saw any counter protesters other than very small groups. And the fact that we were able to essentially have this protest go off without a hitch. Now, again, there's some headlines that call out some reasonable concerns over the protests. And there's a lot of headlines from the corporate press, in my opinion, that essentially make a lot out of nothing. But anyways, let's keep rolling with this. And again, link in the video description down below if you want to follow the entire drone footage there. But the first piece I want to highlight here was from True North, and essentially 0 arrests all weekend at Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. So as the article states here, Ottawa police have reported 0 arrests at the Freedom Convoy and rally on Parliament Hill this weekend. This despite Justin Trudeau and several journalists warning that the protesters would be violent and even suggesting that the truckers were domestic terrorists. And this insincere framing of this entire movement is definitely one of the things that really frustrates me. And yet I also have hope that this is going to wake up a lot of people, that they're going to realize that, like, hey, there's actually just a bunch of normal Canadians that aren't okay with what's going on, and they have no idea how to truly voice their concerns. They don't know what outlet to put that energy into. Tens of thousands of demonstrators exercise their democratic right by protesting government overreach and demanding their freedoms back. And then direct quote here from the Ottawa Police Service. So officers encountered several challenges with demonstrators, including sporadic road blockages by trucks, which officers worked to clear. These high-risk situations were de-escalated and resolved with no arrests. A subsequent statement issued on Sunday evening at 7:30 p.m. stated that police had dealt with some disruptive, inappropriate, and threatening behavior from demonstrators, but did not mention any arrests. Again, I just want to say how proud I am of my fellow Canucks for being able to host such a large protest without any serious damage caused, without any violence, without any arrests occurring. And just wanted to highlight, this is just one little note here in this article. In November 2020, a Black and Indigenous Lives Matter protest digressed into violence and resulted in a dozen people being arrested and charged with mischief. In response, the organizers insisted they didn't do anything wrong. And again, this isn't me trying to throw shade at this other protest that occurred back in 2020. This is just me highlighting that I think it's very reasonable to expect that organizers of a protest and participants that don't do bad things aren't responsible for individuals that may show up at their protest and do bad things, particularly if they're not directly calling for it. So again, I don't know the exact details behind that protest, but if those organizers weren't up there being like, and you guys now go destroy public property or go cause mischief or, like, you know, get yourselves arrested, if they're not making those direct calls to action, again, it seems very reasonable, in my opinion, that they would claim that they didn't do anything wrong. The same way that had even something bad, you know, had there been arrests, had there been something like a significant outbreak of violence at this protest this weekend, again, that would have immediately, you know, resulted in negating every other individual that showed up and peacefully protested while there. However, one thing that really frustrated me about what I saw in the mainstream media was, and I'm not sure why my internet's so slow here, guys, I apologize, but this article from the Toronto Star calling, oh, thank you for the pop-up, Toronto Star, but calling the Ottawa protesters peaceful downplays nonviolent dangers, critics say. And this just feels disingenuous because what I'm going to highlight here for you guys could be applied to just about any protest. And again, to frame it this way, I think it shows the narrative that particularly the Toronto Star is hoping to paint these protesters with. So police haven't reported any physical violence at the ongoing rally or at the ongoing Ottawa rally against vaccine mandates and other government-imposed COVID-19 restrictions. But critics warn that conflating the absence of bloodshed with peaceful protest downplays the dangers of the weekend demonstrations. And I just can't help but feel that if this was a different cause, the Toronto Star probably wouldn't be taking aim the way they are in this article. So McKinney, who is non-binary, said they aren't sure they would be safe venturing downtown. Now, again, this is an extremely broad statement that just feels disingenuous to me to say, like, hey, here's my sexual orientation, and I'm not sure if I'd be safe venturing downtown. Well, I guess first question I have is, do you always feel safe venturing downtown in the first place? And then secondly, what about this protest in particular is so concerning to you, particularly when there was no issues at hand? Direct quote, "There's no doubt that there is a large element in this convoy that is part of a movement that is extreme and that is xenophobic. We knew that coming into the weekend, but it's really very difficult to see that play out in our neighborhoods." So again, how, like, this direct quote here, I get it, you're directly quoting a source, but like, how can she prove, or how can they prove that there is a large element in the convoy and that it's part of a movement that is extreme and xenophobic? Other than the rhetoric that we've heard coming out of our prime minister, who again doesn't really have a lot of facts backing him up. And over the course of the last week, we've done 3 different special episodes of the Maple Pill, essentially highlighting how, at best, anti-hate.ca found some tenuous relationships. But again, even tenuous relationships doesn't result in meaning that the crux of the protest is that, or that the majority, or even that there's a large element, as stated in this article. Continuing on, he explored the issue in a series of tweets in which and so this one now is from Josh Greenberg, who is a professor of communication and media studies at Carleton University. He explained the issue in a series of tweets in which he argued the evidence of intimidation and harassment alongside the blatant flouting of public health measures and limiting access to key city infrastructure do not meet a common definition of peaceful. And this is where I really start to get frustrated when we start dickering over definitions. Again, when we see, property being defaced at other types of protests, that will still often be framed as peaceful or mostly peaceful protests. And yet the moment that this protest occurs, we want to essentially massage the definition of what it means to be peaceful. And it just feels very disingenuous to me. So, of course, race gets brought up in this article. So this smacks of racism and white privilege. He said, if you had a Muslim or a brown person or an indigenous person who organized such an event and called for unseating the government of this country, security forces would have been down on them like a bag of hammers. Now, again, is that the case? Because my understanding is when you read into the actual platform of Black Lives Matters and some of the other protests that have occurred here in Canada and sympathy protests, they'll often have some pretty strong rhetoric coming from both members as well as like literally stated as part of their platform. And again, we don't really see that being framed that way. And at the same time, let's understand it wasn't just 100%, angry white dudes at this protest. It appeared like it really was representative of Canada in general. At least that's what I saw from the footage. Again, if you guys disagree, let me know. Share your sources in the comment section. But direct quote here again. So violence becomes more likely when organizers don't give themselves wiggle room and then have to protect their reputations and leadership in the face of movement failure. And so essentially the reason that this quote got brought up, and I'm highlighting it, is they essentially they pointed out, the Toronto Star here tried to point out a fault of the protesters and the organizers, which was they've got a bunch of different kind of positions. And so because they had a bunch of different positions, they then didn't become violent. And it's like, what sort of circular logic are we dealing with here where, no, they simply weren't violent. They made that their statement throughout this entire course, constantly asking for their members to be completely peaceful, respectful, and all those things. And again, with such a large group, when we're talking about what at least appears to be tens of thousands of Canadians, it's hard to believe that, honestly, it's hard at this point in time for me to believe that there wasn't more bad actors, whether that be, people operating under a false flag or whether it's just silly people being drawn out of the woodwork, right? Once you've got 100 humans in a room together, like one of them is probably going to be a little bit off his rocker. And the fact that we were able to see such a peaceful protest, I think really shows the intentions of all the individuals involved, or at least the vast majority. Another quote here, the big question is where all this energy goes as we enter into year 3 of the pandemic, he said, and whether the coalescing of these different ideologies could result in new dangerous forms of extremism. It just, I don't know, it's so apparent at this point in time that either the government and the mainstream corporate press is so addicted to fear porn that they just need to find a new boogeyman to point at. Or alternatively, like they are in such an echo chamber that even when protesters act in a nonviolent way, if those protesters don't represent their interests, they have to frame them as such. And both of those are concerning when we're thinking about what I mentioned earlier, the idea of a cultural civil war. I can't see how these two sides can come together at this point in time when they literally appear to exist and live in completely separate realities. And so, moving on here, just want to highlight some of the controversies that were brought up throughout this weekend's protest. So one of them was there was a bunch of static on Twitter and social media about how the cenotaph at the National War Memorial was used as a parking lot for protesters. And so here's a photo of it, and this is kind of the photo used to show, what a disregard for military vets. And you can see here a reply, and again, link in the video description down below from Ottawa Police was, hi there. When asked by police to move, they complied and are no longer there. Thank you. This sounds like the most Canadian protest I've ever heard of. They're literally like, hey, you guys aren't supposed to park there. Could you move? Yeah, sure, bud. No problem. Right? Again, maybe there's more to the story, but I don't see what motivations Ottawa Police would have to lie about this. Continuing on, then there was a controversy, and this is picked up by CBC News here. Edmonton area MP under fire for photo of him near flag bearing Nazi symbol. And so essentially, this is, it's too bad they didn't screen grab the actual photo, but there was an upside down Canadian flag with a swastika on it. Now, again, let's understand that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a Nazi supporter. That's often used as imagery towards saying that people disagree with the tyranny being experienced here in Canada. And I'm going to circle back to that in a second, but I just wanted to highlight here what Michael Cooper, the MP in question, actually put out in his official statement. So, today, I attended a peaceful protest in support of truckers and other Canadians defending their freedoms and jobs. I did an impromptu interview with CBC. Moments later, I learned from social media that, unbeknownst to me, someone with whom I'm not associated had been standing some distance behind me, behind my back, holding a flag with an evil symbol on it. Had I seen the symbol, I would have condemned it, as I do now. Nazism is the purest form of evil, and I've always condemned it completely. Whoever flew this flag is personally responsible for that reprehensible decision and should be eternally ashamed of him or herself. He or she does not represent the thousands of peaceful protesters who waved Canadian flags and acted responsibly. I stand with them and will continue to fight for them. And yeah, that seems like a very, one, reasonable response to it. But two, again, the idea that one person holding one symbol immediately invalidates tens of thousands of Canadians' positions is asinine. And we're going to circle back to that in a bit, but I want to cover some of the other controversies, but you'll kind of understand really how silly this is in a second. So then this is from Global News, and the headline is a quote, "Just sickening. Backlash after Terry Fox statue appropriated at Ottawa trucker rally." I also saw other people framing this essentially as it being defaced. And so let's be very clear on what they did here. They put I think a Team Canada hat on top of him, draped him in a Canadian flag, had him, I believe, holding the flag upside down, and then had a sign that said something to the effect of cancel vaccine mandates, right? Or mandate freedom. So here's the controversy. So again, while I agree that this is probably distasteful, not desirable, one, this appears to all be undoable, which I think is important to highlight here, right? Because again, there's been other protests where we didn't see this same sort of reaction from the corporate press. But here's a direct quote: "To have someone try and appropriate his legacy and his image for a political cause, whatever the cause, is just sickening." Port Coquitlam Mayor Brad West told Global News, "It's just so wrong." So again, whatever the cause is just sickening is the direct quote here. And then when we continue down, this was quickly picked up on Reddit. This is essentially Liberal supporters, Liberals putting flowers and pride flag on Terry Fox. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is a perfect apples to apples comparison, but literally holding a Liberal sign that's the rainbow flag and putting the rainbow flag on Terry Fox, this still feels like you're trying to co-opt Terry Fox for a political movement, for a political stance, when, again, to the best of my knowledge, he was relatively apolitical and very focused on fighting cancer, raising money, and trying to improve healthcare in Canada. So again, I'm not saying that this is evil and it needs to be disavowed, But I don't see a drastic difference between that and this, in my opinion. And so, again, this is where it feels disingenuous for the mainstream press to focus on these small things. Because essentially, the reason, in my opinion, they're focusing on these small things is because there's no big things for them to really grab onto. And then let's highlight, some of the statues that were defaced in a more aggressive manner, which is having paint thrown on them, right? Which either takes significant effort to repair or restore. So again, the way the Toronto Sun framed this, arrest made as Toronto statues defaced during BLM protests. So again, I'm not really calling into question the BLM protests, but understand that there's been a lot of statues defaced over the last few years. And oftentimes the way it's framed is simply like, oh, these individuals were arrested because they caused damage to property. The same way, I don't know exactly what the rules are in regards to like doing non-permanent damage or like putting something on a statue. But if the bylaws say that you can be arrested or charged for that, again, it would seem appropriate to enforce it on the individuals that did it here for the trucker mandates or the trucker protests against mandates. But I can't help but think that it would have been framed very differently had the cause been different. Again, City News, 3 protesters charged after statues defaced during Black Lives Matter Toronto March. And again, we can see significant damage. I don't think that immediately they were calling for complete removal of any and all Black Lives Matter protests, and that movement was totally sickening and needed to be dissolved immediately because of that. I think people understand that most times when someone's protesting, they're coming from an emotional standpoint, and those emotions can spill over. And again, there will often be provocateurs, individuals that are going to tend towards the extreme that are going to try and cause this division. And that's not really my goal here. But again, I just find it so disingenuous. This is from Global News. No injuries after incident involving truck and Ottawa police barricade. And now, right now, this feels like a real nothing burger because there's almost no facts, but maybe there's more to it than what they're letting on. But if there is, why not share that directly with us? So here's a direct quote. Police have responded to an incident involving a truck at a police barrier. Ottawa police said spokesperson Constable Premjit Singh said in an email, there were no injuries and the situation was de-escalated, updates to follow. So again, why you would lead with this as the headline of a article on the trucker protest, I think to me shows the intentions, the desire to construct a narrative around it. And if you guys missed it, there was actually a false report that Rebel News was quick to disavow or like show was false reporting in regards to. Anyways, let me just read it for you guys. This is from Rebel News. Rebel News confirms that social media reports of a trucker crashing into barricades in Ottawa are untrue. Rebel reporters Alexa Levoli and Lincoln J headed to Albert and Eglin to confirm that the rumor of trucks crashing through a checkpoint is a false alarm. So at some point in time, someone jumped on a CB radio and said 4 trucks had just crashed through police barricades. That turned out to be completely false. There's no other reports other than what initially started going viral on social media. Again, it's really frustrating in this day and age that we have to go on such a sleuthing mission to even try and understand what the hell's going on. But that's where we're at. I don't think you can purely trust any one individual at this point in time. You need to really focus on aggregating information. Again, that's why I share all my links in the video description down below. Now, moving on from that, there was an individual that was carrying a Nazi flag, and True North has actually been really leading the way on trying to identify that individual. So everything we know so far about the Nazi flag guy, 2 or 3 men flying racist flags should not taint an entire movement. But actual Nazis should be named, shamed, and driven out of the Freedom Convoy movement. We need to know who these individuals are and why they are trying to harm the reputation of hardworking Canadians using their democratic right to hold a peaceful protest. I completely agree with that. And if you happen to be there, if you can identify the individual, just know that True North right now has a $6,500 reward for any individual that leads to the identifying of that person. Again, link in the video description down below. But circling back now to the site of a Nazi or of a swastika on a Canadian flag that happens to also be upside down. This is a tweet from Pierre Poilievre, but Trudeau calmly looked at the racists holding this flag at his event. Thank you for coming, sir. This is a direct quote, and there's a link to a City News Toronto article. Again, evil fig leaf empire is what's written on it, and you can see it's very clearly in Trudeau's field of sight. And he didn't immediately condemn it. He didn't immediately feel compelled to call that person a racist. with unacceptable views represent a fringe minority. Again, you know, I think people should have the right to show these images and to have their own opinions. And we also have the right to completely disagree with them. And as kind of said in that True North article, you have the right to like choose to not associate with them, to want to shame them, to want to disavow them to whatever extent you wish. Again, it doesn't immediately invalidate it. And again, the fact that Trudeau thanked that person for coming to his rally doesn't immediately invalidate Justin Trudeau as an evil person either. There's lots of other facts that do that for us. That's kind of a joke. Then going on here, Vice. So low lights of the anti-vax trucker convoy that took over Canada's capital. And now Vice comes with a lot of bias, in my opinion. There used to be a time when I think they were actually focused on citizen journalism, but that was like way back in the day at the very beginning. So defecating in public. Yep. Hey, if you're shitting in public or pissing in public, you shouldn't be shitting or pissing in public. I'm going to agree with you there. However, I wouldn't be surprised at any large gathering. Like, have you guys ever been to a music festival with tens of thousands of people? Because like I've been to Osheaga. There's definitely people that do that. I've been to like tractor pulls in the United States. It definitely occurs there as well. I don't think that this immediately, invalidates the entire thing. And in fact, it's both unfortunate that both the city, the police forces, as well as the organizers didn't plan more in advance and, bring porta potties, try and get more public washrooms open. But again, understand the fact that the cities essentially locked down because restaurants aren't open. They're only open for takeout and things of that nature. Also restrict the options available to the individuals that wanted to protest there. So I guess like my biggest question to Vice News here is, so if there's not adequate bathroom facilities, does that invalidate the right of citizens to protest? So does that mean essentially if the government was just to shut down all the bathrooms, that then we're not allowed to protest? Because that seems kind of silly to me, more than just kind of. Stealing food from unhoused people. So again, this report appears to be true. In one extreme case, a local soup kitchen said its staff were harassed by some rally attendees who demanded food. It also said at least one Ottawa unhoused person was assaulted and a security guard who came to their aid was berated with racial slurs. The racial slurs stuff I haven't seen quoted, I don't think, in other sources, but definitely it does appear that there was an incident at a soup kitchen. Again, that individual should be charged if they assaulted someone, if they broke the law, but it feels like a stretch here. Like they're essentially trying to find like a handful of small issues and trying to build this into some grand narrative. Displaying of swastikas. So again, what's important to understand here is like these actually get displayed more often in Canada than you realize. You may not like it, but and I'll show you guys a couple of photos further down the road here. But if you've ever been to a pro-Palestine rally, right, or protest, you'll often see like the Israeli flag with swastikas on it or comparisons about Israel today and, Nazi Germany. And again, that's directed directly at people of Jewish descent and the Jewish state, which also seems honestly to me far more anti-Semitic than either the situation with the conservative MP accidentally standing in front of an upside down Canadian flag, or the one of Trudeau knowingly looking at it and thanking the individual for coming out. Vandalizing the Terry Fox statue. So again, as I said, I believe that this is a bit of a stretch to frame it as vandalizing. I don't know what the actual definition is, though. So if this is technically vandalizing, it seems like the most respectful form of vandalization of a statue. So again, compare if it was this or throwing paint on it, I'd rather than put a Team Canada hat and have him holding an upside down Canadian flag and a sign, because that seems like it's far less disruptive and less damage caused. But a quote here, for many Canadians, the mockery of Fox went too far. I'm going to say, if you think that this is a mockery of Terry Fox, I guess we've got different definitions of mockery. I think that the upside down flag isn't meant to mock Terry Fox. It's meant to mock the Canadian state. And essentially, an upside down flag is, my understanding, an international sign of distress. So it's essentially a way for people to show like, hey, we're under distress. We don't like what's going on here in Canada. And again, I'm not going to say that they should have done it, but I don't think that this is the smoking gun that they wish it was. Desecrating the war memorial. So rally goers were also criticized for their desecration of the tomb of the unknown soldier at the National War Memorial. Several photos and videos show the war memorial being used as a parking lot, which, again, Ottawa police said they asked people to move, and they moved, so there was no real issue there, to the best of my knowledge. I don't know why Ottawa police would lie to us. and a urinal for others, and some protesters were dancing upon it. So dancing upon it, again, like it maybe is distasteful, but I don't know, does that actually count as desecrating it? Now, if someone was pissing on it, absolutely, that seems insulting, and I believe that there's charges for it, and I would expect that the police would have charged the individuals that did it if that was the case. Forcing the mall to close. So this one feels like a real fucking stretch, in my opinion, where essentially they're saying there were so many protesters that went to this mall, and those protesters decided to not wear masks, which again, my understanding is like if you're exempt, if you state you're exempt, you're allowed to go into these places without a mask, to use the washroom facilities and to get food. And there was such chaos at this mall that they shut it down early. Now, again, forcing it to close, I think, is a very interesting way to frame it. I think if you've got like I don't know, if the Maple Leafs ever win the Stanley Cup, I would expect, or we can look back to like Vancouver, right? Wasn't there something going on in downtown Vancouver? I would expect more craziness to occur at a Canadian team winning or losing the Stanley Cup Finals than what appears to have gone on at this protest of individuals that are extremely upset with the government. And think about the sort of moderation and constraint that shows. And then they highlight that it's going international. And this is one of the funniest things to me, the fact that it is going international, and yet the mainstream press is only doubling down on the fact that it's racist, that it's a fringe minority of individuals that are involved with all this. Because, again, I don't know, does it turn out that there's just white supremacists in every country, a large group, and they were just waiting for the white supremacists in Canada to raise the flag, and then they were all going to go cause havoc? Just seems a lot more likely that people are really frustrated with their government's responses and essentially their inability to respond accordingly to COVID-19. We've had over 2 years to improve our healthcare infrastructure, but did we actually do it here in Canada? Well, we don't have a lot more ICU beds than when we started the pandemic. And again, we've covered this all in other videos, so I'll leave that for another day. But I did want to highlight, again, this from CBC News. The title here is Protest Convoy Had Worst Display of Nazi Propaganda in This Country, Anti-Hate Advocate Says. So this is complete bullshit. To the best of my knowledge, there was one truck with a Confederate flag. And again, you guys fact check me on this, but there was one truck with a Confederate flag. There was one dude walking around with a Confederate flag that had a truck in the center of it. There was one dude walking around with a straight up Nazi flag. And then there was a handful of individuals that had upside down Canadian flags, and at least one of them had a swastika drawn on it. So understand that he is stating, and this is where it does a disservice. Like in London, Ontario, there was a true fringe group of like a handful of individuals that were neo-Nazis that would go protest at City Hall, and they would have Nazi paraphernalia. But always the counter protests were even larger than that because, hey, those individuals were actually Nazis, and people don't actually respect or care for Nazis whatsoever. But did you know that Canada actually, was responsible for training real neo-Nazis in 2014? Yeah. And so this is a tweet, but I'm going to back it up in a second with some facts. So why is no one talking about Canada training neo-Nazis? Liberals, the truckers are racist. One was carrying a Confederate flag. The neo-Nazis supporting government is offended by a flag. Liberals, racist, truckers, you don't get it. Liberals, racist, truckers. And so you guys can Google it here, but there's lots of different articles on this. It was kind of making the rounds in fall of 2021. But far-right extremists and Ukraine military bragged about Canadian training, report says. So this is a photo of them. And go do your own research on this. But these are what real far-right extremists look like. This is what real neo-Nazis are. So in an emailed statement to CTV News on Monday, the Canadian Armed Forces said it is very concerned by the findings of the study. In light of these findings, D&D will be conducting a thorough review of the report, including whether or not current policies and procedures in place are sufficiently stringent to flag and prevent the Canadian Armed Forces from unwittingly aiding those whose views it fundamentally opposes, the statement reads. Again, I'm going to be honest here, and this is where a bit of my bias is going to come out. I don't think that this caught the Canadian Armed Forces or the government off guard. I just think they were hoping this would never get brought up. The fact that we literally trained neo-Nazis to fight the Russians during the Crimea situation back in 2014. And so again, it's important that we understand that like this is more common than any of us would like to believe. But again, it's not the Canadian truckers. And this was a response to a tweet I saw going around. So essentially, This was from Bruce Anderson. If you're part of a convoy that flies a Confederate flag, you can leave the convoy or accept that others will think the worst of you. If you're a politician who says these people need to be heard instead of criticized, expect people to question your judgment. So again, one dude with one truck with a Confederate flag out of thousands of vehicles and tens of thousands of Canadians, that immediately means that everyone had to go home because he showed up. Would that mean that the moment anyone showed up with any sorts of wrong think and bad symbols, that immediately we just all need to stop our protests and go home? Because if that's the case, honestly, most pro-Palestine rallies, you would have to just shut down. A lot of Black Lives Matter protests, you would have to shut down. Again, I'm not saying that that's what I want, but when you apply this logic to the other side of the aisle, it becomes very obvious how disingenuous this is. So again, that's essentially what I asked here. Does the same logic hold true at protests where people wear hammer and sickle or Che t-shirts? And honestly, if you guys don't know, like the Che t-shirt that, you know, every, I don't know, university student that wants to seem hip or cool or anti-establishment wears, go look at what Che actually did. Look at his policies. Look at his opinion of people of African descent. Look at his opinions of people that were homosexual. They were not good. He created camps for them. Yes. Go study your history. Because again, people should have the right, and this is my statement here, people should have the right to display all these symbols regardless of how distasteful one might find them. But one participant or small group doesn't invalidate an entire movement. And again, I just said at the bottom here, if you think communism and Che aren't as bad as Confederate flag, maybe you should study history more. Because you should. Straight up. Fucking learn some history. And then so I wanted to highlight this from the Toronto Sun. Protesters swastikas cross the line. So this is from May of 2021. This was during some pro-Palestinian protests. So again, swastikas all over the Israeli flag. And I understand that's directly directed at people of Jewish descent. There's also, again, this was in Canada. Again, Nazis equal the Jewish state, essentially. Death to Israel. Then we've got, I think there was even one here from Canada. Literally a Nazi flag being flown. I'm pretty sure that this is right at like Richmond and Pall Mall. I know London pretty well. And so again, like that's wildly distasteful. But I don't think that that immediately invalidates anyone that's pro-Palestine or anyone that showed up to that rally or that protest. And it just seems disingenuous to apply it to the truckers. Now, I do want to highlight something that this just came out today, so there's not a lot of information on it. If it's true, then I think that this is wrong. Rocks hurled at Ottawa ambulance at downtown truck convoy. And essentially, there just wasn't a lot of details here. It came out just like a few hours ago. But again, link in the video description down below if you guys want to go check it out. But this seems like one of the most aggressive, violent things that actually occurred in Ottawa. But again, that occurred today, which is like 3 days into the protest. Moving on, just to kind of highlight the counter perspective here a little bit, because I heard so many people talking about how people on Twitter and stuff saying they were scared to leave their houses, you know, that they felt like they were a city under siege, and, you know, they felt like they were being microaggression by people showing up and all that. Well, this is from Blacklock's reporter, and this isn't about protests, but this is about essentially employees of the federal government. So harassed, mocked, and ridiculed. Federal employees who declined vaccination say they have been ridiculed, harassed, and threatened. Workers in a lawyer's letter to the Treasury Board said suspending unimmunized staff without pay amounted to wrongful dismissal. This is a direct quote from one of the individuals. As federal public servants, we have had our livelihood stripped from us. Feds for Freedom and advocacy group said in a statement, we have endured unprecedented amounts of stress and hardship. We have been harassed, mocked, and had hatred and violence incited against us, wrote staff. This type of abusive behavior cannot and will not be tolerated. And yet again, overall, in my opinion, the media is very silent on this sort of harassment. But if a trucker looked at someone the wrong way, then immediately they're going to frame it as microaggressions and that, hey, even if you're not violent, you could still be violent. And one other thing, like go look at the actual footage of protests. You're going to see Canadians of all colors and stripes there. And it just doesn't fit the mainstream media narrative, so they're not really going to share it with you. Then I just want to highlight, if you guys want to, you know, try and go to more sources of facts, the Ottawa police have been doing a decent job of updating what's going on. So, for example, I highlighted here one of their later updates on Sunday, update number 5. So again, link in the video description down below. But I know this is going to be a long episode, so we're just going to keep flying through it. One thing that definitely wasn't getting picked up in the mainstream media was this from the Post Millennial, and I saw this on social media. Watch, Freedom Convoy truckers find nails on the road to Ottawa. They are putting nails on the ground so we can't get through, says the trucker filming the discovery. And definitely, it does seem
guys, this is a convoy from St. Jerome to Ottawa, and they're putting nails now on the ground so we can't get through.
These individuals have handfuls and handfuls of nails.
Show me the nails.
Look at this, buddy.
Show me the nails. Montrez-moi les clous, les gars. Montrez-moi les clous. Checkez tous les clous qu'ils mettent à taille.
Could have their tire or tires popped, and that definitely can put you in a dangerous situation. Now, I really love this article from True North. The Canadian legacy media's 11 worst spins on the truckers for Freedom Convoy. Number 1, CBC anchor invents conspiracy theory about Russia orchestrating convoy. So we don't have time to go down a giant rabbit hole about Russia, but remember how in 2016, essentially all the narrative said that Trump maybe colluded with Russia and, they stole the election, Go actually look into the details there. And, if you really want to go down a rabbit hole, Google the one name you're not allowed to say on YouTube that involves a Ukraine incident. Literally, if I was to say that word right now, the algorithm would immediately ban me and remove my channel. That's a real thing. Again, there really is no evidence, but they're simply saying, because it's a far-right protest, presumably Russia agitated it. Again, could it be that Russia helped agitate it to some degree? I've got no idea, but I can tell you one random CBC pundit definitely doesn't have a fucking clue either. Number 2, the Washington Post cartoonist smears Canadian truckers as fascists. We covered this in another story, on another day, so I'll leave you guys to go back and look at it. But again, it's just so disingenuous. Number 3, Parliament today, experts said donating to Convoy is funding domestic terrorism. Nope, it absolutely isn't. That's complete bullshit. The facts now clearly show it after the fact that we're 3 days deep into this protest. No domestic terrorism's occurred so far. Good luck next time, Fed poster. Number 4, journalist says protest is medium large and that it's invisible in Ottawa core. So we already saw the drone footage, but this is just embarrassing. They understand that we also have cameras and eyes, right? At this point in time, some of these reporters, some of these politicians are literally telling you, don't trust your own eyes, just trust what we say to you. Number 5, reporter tries to portray families lighting a small bonfire as things get out of hand. So a family decided to light a small bonfire to try and stay warm, and that was a sign that things were getting completely out of hand at the protest. Fucking Canada, it's really cold. Not that shocked that at least one person tried to start a fire, particularly if it was a bonfire. Number 6, CBC journo tries to smear Convoy using random text messages. Again, I'll leave you guys to go down the rabbit hole, but eventually he was forced to issue a clarification later that same day, however, admitting that the text came from a different number than the contact number. So he literally was given a contact number, got text from a different number, and claimed or ascribed them to the trucker convoy movement. Number 7 here, CTV journalist suggests single Confederate flag will be one of many. So again, they were salivating the moment they saw this one Confederate flag. And one interesting thing here is when you look at the individuals that were using these these symbols that appear to really be trying to hijack the protest, right? The Nazi flag as well as the Confederate flag. These individuals are wearing full face masks. They're dressing a lot more like you would expect to see Antifa dressing than what most truckers were dressing like. So again, just food for thought there. Number 8, media cites far left anti-hate activists as expert to paint Convoy as extremists. We've already kind of covered that, but again, that's the same individual that essentially stated that this was, where was it again? This was the protest convoy had worst display of Nazi propaganda in this country, anti-hate advocate says. Again, I literally showed you pro-Palestinian protesters from less than a year ago that had just as many swastikas or more, and those were directly directed at people of Jewish descent and those of their Israeli citizens. Number 9, legacy journalists get defensive over being criticized for comparing convoy protests to U.S. Capitol riots. I know they were just hoping that Canadians would go off the rails here and start, frothing at the mouth and attack a building or attack someone, but nope, turns out just very polite Canadians overall. Number 10, Globe and Mail falsely claims Sikhs truckers were not invited to join convoy. So again, there's actually a large group of truckers of visible minorities that were there in different religions than Christianity that were all supporting it. And I love the fact that most of them were tagging themselves as, either racist or a fringe minority, because yeah, I think that we all see how ridiculous this is, or at least those of us going eyes wide open into this narrative. Again, we can see, passing out food and stuff like that, which is great. And again, lots of sources, links in the video description down below. Number 11, CTV News falsely claims convoy is embarrassing to truckers. Again, who are they to make that claim, right? Shouldn't we just let the truckers decide whether this is an embarrassment to truckers? And again, I've no doubt that some truckers probably were embarrassed by this protest, but that doesn't mean that other truckers weren't embarrassed by it. Anyways, we'll keep rolling here. So if you guys missed it, Justin Trudeau did come out of his shell for a brief moment just to essentially say that he won't give in, that he's not intimidated by the truckers. I'm just going to play a little clip here for you guys.
Minister move past the division and agree to meet with some of the truckers impacted by his federal regulations.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the science is very clear. The best way through this pandemic is to get people vaccinated. That's how we end the disruptions to our supply chains caused by this global pandemic. That's how we get back to the things we love to do. That's why we've been unequivocal on the need to get vaccinated. And
they tell us that 90% of Canadians are vaccinated. What percentage? Is it 99? Do we need 101%? Do we need 110% effort from Canadian citizens in order for us to then be able to go back to normal? Until they literally spell it out for us, what they believe is the path forward, this is all just smoke and mirrors. This is all just delay tactics. This is ingenuous at this point in time. 90% Canadians, and yet all kinds of, you can look at other countries and other jurisdictions that have a much lower vaccination rate that are able to open up. What happened to their science? And then this was Trudeau's actual statement on the trucker protest. So again, just want to play a little clip here for you guys.
I know you're wondering about what you saw in our capital city this weekend. As my friend Erwin Kotler said on Saturday, freedom of expression, assembly, and association are cornerstones of democracy, but Nazi symbolism, racist imagery, and desecration of war memorials are not. It is an insult to memory and truth.
So again, just quick question here for the Prime Minister. Does the same hold true for this situation? Was that an insult? Right? What about, I won't go back over it. You guys already saw it, but it's so frustrating how disingenuous they are at this point in time and how comfortable they are just reading their talking points, regardless of what the facts on the ground actually state. This is from Post Millennial, but breaking: Trudeau accuses trucker convoy protesters of racism and vandalism. And again, honestly, any Stanley Cup game, we're going to see more vandalism for sure. And I wouldn't even be shocked if it was the similar volumes of racism, because there were so few going on. And this is the one individual that did have a swastika flag going on throughout the protest. And again, we may find it distasteful, but I don't think it invalidates an entire movement. Then this is from the Independent. Justin Trudeau and family moved to secret location as Canada truckers protest spark security fears, report says. And what's frustrating is this seemed to be one of the big things that international media was picking up on. Again, I'm not even like, he said it was a French minority. They constantly downplayed the number of people that were going to show up. We played that one clip of the one liberal spokesperson that my buddy Mark called, and they said they expected less than 10%. And then at one point he said 10 trucks. If it was such a small group, you'd wonder why they had these serious security fears. And then if you guys missed it, Pierre Poilievre was essentially calling Justin Trudeau out on his bullshit here, as well as some of his cabinet members. So this was from Catherine McKenna. Conservative politicians egging on the convoy have a lot to answer for. None more than Pierre Poilievre, who represents the Ottawa region. Instead of standing with Ottawans, he stood with folks with swastikas and Confederate flags who beat up homeless, denigrated memorials, and closed businesses. And Pierre's response was, "You are a liar, Miss McKenna. I stood with no such flags. You support a man who dressed up in racist costumes so often he lost count and targeted and expelled racial minorities in his own caucus because they would not fall in line. Confront your leader's racist conduct. And, while Twitter doesn't always leave us with the grace of details, I think that this was really well put, very concise, and I don't disagree with it. And moving on from that, I want to highlight this article from Ron Paul that was on Zero Hedge. I'm just going to read the first couple paragraphs for you guys, but I think it is important. We all remember where we were when the Berlin Wall came down. While it may have seemed that communist rule would go on forever, when the people decided that they had enough, suddenly the wall fell, just like that. Thus, it is after 2 years of COVID authoritarianism that in Canada, the largest truck convoy in history has smashed through the Berlin Wall of tyranny. I have watched as the Canada I once respected as a haven for anti-war Americans in the 1960s turned into one of the most repressive countries on earth. I wondered how a freedom-loving people could allow themselves to be abused by these mini Stalins. Why is that covering it up? But by these mini Stalins. Sorry, guys. By these mini Stalins without a peep. But when Canada stood up and showed the rest of the world that freedom can triumph over tyranny if the people demand it, as I say, no army can stop an idea whose time has come. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had been basking in his ability to terrorize the population in the name of fighting the virus. He was so confident in his seemingly unlimited power that he felt he could ridicule any Canadian with different views. The Prime Minister said in a recent interview that unvaccinated Canadians were extremists, misogynist, and racist. And then, again, I encourage you guys to read the entire article. Just want to highlight here, Elon Musk says fringe minority is actually the government in tweets about trucker protests. I'm pretty sure I shared with you guys a couple memes of the similar opinion. And I don't disagree. And this children's book, Like is Hitler, a children's guide to online political discussions. And that really seems to be the book, the script that our prime minister reads from. Someone disagrees with me, call them a racist. Call them sexist. Say that they've got unacceptable views. And I know we're going long here, guys, so I won't read this article or this essay from Jeffrey Tucker, but I really encourage you to read it. It's courtesy of the Ron Paul Institute, link in the video description down below. And again, just looking at now is the time for mass resignations from within the ruling class. I quickly want to highlight here that I didn't see this getting a lot of press coverage, but Doug Ford finally came out and denounced the protesting truckers. So this is a direct quote. The right to peaceful protest is core to our Canadian identity, Ford said on Monday in the wake of political rivals demanding he speak out about the rally against vaccination mandates for truckers who cross the Canada-U.S. border. I was extremely disturbed, however, to see some individuals desecrate our most sacred monuments and wave swastikas and other symbols of hate and intolerance this weekend, the Premier said in a statement. That has no place in Ontario or Canada, not now, not ever. I think the biggest question I've got is, does he say that for every single protest? And does it also count when they wear Che t-shirts or have the hammer and sickle? Again, that's not for me to make little of Nazis, but understand that one individual carrying a Nazi flag out of tens of thousands of people, I don't know why this is the piece you focus on, right? Why not talk about the 99.99999% Canadians that showed up that day that were actually just very peaceful, very respectful, zero arrests, as reported by the Ottawa police at the time of this video. That feels just as relevant or more relevant than one bad actor. And then if you guys want a completely different perspective on this entire process, check out Rebel News in this article. Positivity abounded in Ottawa and beyond. A quick look at today's events. And that's the one thing I heard from everyone that slid into my DMs that posted on Discord, whether they were in Ottawa or at their local provincial legislature building, was like, hey, it was actually just great vibes. Like, people talked about just crying because they felt finally like they were part of a community again. I think for so many people, they've been isolated for so long. They've been told they're a thought criminal, that they're evil, that they're inherently racist, that they're anti-vaccination simply because they disagree with the current regime. And it's important to understand you're not alone. and you've never been alone. They just want you to believe you're alone, because when you feel alone, when you feel isolated, is when you feel often the weakest, but you're not. And we're starting to really see that now. And I couldn't be more proud of my fellow Canadians. And so, again, if you guys want to see some updates on what's going on, essentially it sounds like at this point in time, the protesters are really showing no sign of giving up or moving on. And again, depending on what side of the political spectrum you're on, it's getting framed in very different ways. But again, there's a link here to an article from the Canadian Press if you guys want to see further. Then this update from CTV News: all options are on the table to end trucker protests, Ottawa police chief said. And so it sounds like they've tried bringing in different tow trucks and things of that nature. But again, they've often been blocked off by citizens who park their cars and block the roads and stuff like that. It definitely is a complicated situation. I don't think right now anyone's happy per se. I understand that those that are protesting, they're only doing so because for the last 2 years, essentially, they've been ignored. They've been ostracized. They've been made to feel lesser than simply because of an individual medical decision. Or again, there's a lot of individuals that were at the protest that are vaccinated, some that are, even boosted. Again, they're tired of being told what to do. They want to be given the free choice to choose to go get vaccinated rather than being coerced through the state's, tyrannical measures. So again, link if you guys want to see exactly what the Ottawa police update was. But I do want to say overall, it seems like all the protesters, all the police officers were very respectful of each other. It overall seemed very Canadian, and I was personally very glad to see it. Now, before we wrap up, I'm going to leave you guys with a couple lighter notes. And again, appreciate those of you jumping in the comment section and sharing your perspective and your experiences. I really do appreciate it. But first of all, if you guys didn't see this flag making the rounds on social media, I'm pretty sure that this is going to become, or a version of this is going to become the official flag of the Problems or Profit Citadel at this point in time. Fuck a boot and find doot. Yep, and it's got Canadian geese going apeshit. I love it. I think it's perfect. I couldn't imagine a better flag. However, here's something fun. Have you guys ever gone to liar.com? So just liar.com. And where does it take you? Hopefully my internet's not super slow right now. Awesome. Oh, it takes me to Justin Trudeau's Wikipedia page. Well, that's fun. That's clever. That doesn't really change the political narrative whatsoever, but it is a fun little thing. The fact that liar.com now redirects to our prime minister. So yeah, that's it for today's Maple Pill, guys. I hope you're doing well. Those of you that attend the protest, again, let me know what your perspective was, what your personal experiences were. I really do appreciate those of you that are part of the grassroots movement, those of you that are donating, those of you that are just working towards creating common knowledge that, hey, there's a lot of us out here that aren't okay with what's going on in our government. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're evil. It doesn't necessarily mean even that you hate the government, although maybe I do. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're anti-vaccination even. It can simply mean you're anti-mandate. It's okay to be pro-vaccine and still not like the fact that the government's trying to coerce you or force you to it. It's a slippery slope tyranny, and we've already slid far, far down it. And the time to stop, as Ron Paul was saying, is now. And again, I appreciate everyone that's doing their part to try and stop what's going on here. And that's it. I'm going to really quickly hit a couple of the chats. But again, there was a lot. This is a long episode already. But hey, what's up, Peter, Aislinn, Bruno, Project LB52. We got Abdul. Matatat says, government and media are full of propaganda. Yeah, and as I mentioned at the start, I think the greatest concern I have at this point in time is just a loss in trust. Those of you that know me, I love the book Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. And one of the big things that they explore there is how, as we grew and progressed into higher trust societies, the abundance we experienced increased, right? Our ability to specialize increased because we could trust others to go do other tasks. And again, all the fantastic things that are Canada are because of individual freedoms, right? We wouldn't be Canada if you didn't have the ability to speak out, the ability to protest, the ability to make your own decisions. And we've lost a lot of that over the last 2 years. Some people will say that it's temporary. Those that understand government and history are a lot more suspicious, myself included. Peter says, laugh my fucking ass off. The second the Toronto Sun article got into it being about gender and xenophobia, you can tell it's a waste of time. Yeah, I think that was the Toronto Star, but yes, 100% agree. And like the fact that, don't call it peaceful, even if it was peaceful, because reasons. As soon as I see an article from mainstream media, I know it's a waste of time. More often than not, I agree with you, Mata, there, but it is actually very unfortunate because if we can't trust the media, if we can't trust the politicians, if we can't trust the media to be the check and balance against the politicians, we're going to find ourselves in a very low trust society, and that does none of us any good. Beer saying, don't forget to smash the like button. I concur with that statement. Robert White says, science that can't be questioned is propaganda, just like all our news today that supports it. 100% agree. I forget who said this quote, and I'm probably going to bastardize it, but it's an amazing quote. If you want to know who rules you, look towards who you cannot criticize. And that's honestly the truth. If you can't criticize someone, if they're on a higher than pedestal where you're not allowed to speak ill of them, that person has control over you or the media or politicians or something. And that should concern all of us. LS says, love the truckers, watching the streams, and a new convoy arrived as backup. Yeah, it seems like while some people had to leave because, hey, life and jobs and things of that nature, it does seem like more and more people as well are still coming to Ottawa to support them. It's a really interesting time. I personally feel like we're watching history in the making. Now, again, whatever comes of this, whether mandates fully get stricken down because of the truckers, or eventually everyone goes home and life continues on under this new normal, I believe that this was a success and a win simply because more people now are questioning the mainstream media and more people now realize that they're not alone. And that's one of the primary reasons I started this show, The Maple Pill, was because it was a lonely journey. And I had people that, some people at least, that supported me as I began to discover and understand what was going on and research history more and really start to realize that politicians and the corporate media, the elites, the Davos group, all those individuals, they don't have our best interests at heart. They may believe that they're focused on the greater good, but oftentimes people focusing on the greater good or having good intentions have led us down the path to hell in the past, and I don't see why the future would be any different. Benjamin says, conveniently, they were wearing a mask. Yes, the worst actors in it were wearing a mask, and that to me shows one of two things, or maybe two of two things. One, it could be a false flag operation, right? It could be someone that's acting disingenuously. Or two, even if they believe they're part of the trucker convoy or they're trying to co-opt the trucker convoy, and those are their legitimate views that they're trying to express, they realize how unpalatable it is, right? If they thought that they'd be welcomed with open arms, I don't see why they'd be concerned about covering their face. If Canada was just riddled with racists, I don't see why they'd be worried about showing that flag. Aislinn said, I'm surprised that they aren't complaining about the violation of the noise bylaws with all the honking and singing. Actually, I just want to go down this rabbit hole, but I saw there was one lady on Twitter saying that her cat the entire weekend had explosive diarrhea and was talking about, how disruptive the horns were and how evil the truckers were and how they were, destroying the quality of life for the citizens of Ottawa. Well, that sounds unfortunate, and certainly it'd be more desirable if that didn't happen to you. I also feel like the quality of life that we've all lost over the last 2 years, the fact that children are still being masked in across the province in schools, right? The fact that half the time they're not even in schools, they're doing online learning. We are destroying an entire generation of children in the hope that somehow we're going to be slightly safer. We're sacrificing the next generation in the hopes that people that are at risk and older are somehow going to be slightly safer. Again, when they could easily self-isolate, instead we choose to isolate everyone. Rick says, there was no Confederate flags. Why the hell would there be a flag in Canada? And one guy walking apart from everyone with the Nazi flag and mainstream photographers walking with him. It definitely seems suspicious. Again, I don't want to try and overcorrect without facts, so that's why I tried to present it relatively unbiased. And I think at this point in time, anyone watching my show understands that, like anyone, I'm still going to have my own biases. I'm still going to have my own blind spots. It's why I link to all my sources in the video description down below. Don't let this be the end of your information seeking journey. Let this just be a springboard, a jumping off point. And I encourage you guys to do your own research and make your own decisions, unlike your government, who thinks the exact opposite. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Appreciate the love in the comments there, Kevin, as well. And yeah, until next time, I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you're finding a community of like-minded individuals. I hope you realize day by day you're less alone out there, and you are allowed to make your own decisions regardless of whatever the government tries to coerce you into. And yeah, it really does mean a lot to me that we're able to have these conversations and you guys interact to the level you do. And a reminder, I will be going live tonight on the Matt McKeever Unfiltered YouTube channel, 8:20 Eastern Standard Time, which actually isn't very far from now because I went long on tonight's episode. It's going to be the first Mailbag Monday episode. So I actually got 2 pieces of mail in the last week. So essentially, just a reminder, the way this is going to go, if I get at least 1 piece of mail from you guys, I'll go live on Monday nights at 8:20. We'll just hang out, shoot the shit. It can be an Ask Me Anything. If you guys don't send me any mail, like just a postcard, a letter, it really doesn't matter. No harm, no foul. I'll just assume that I'm not providing enough value on those live streams, and that's all right too. All right. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Presumably, we'll be back with a normal episode of the Maple Pill, where I'll walk you through the blue pill, the red pill, the black pill, clown pill, and finally, we always try and end on the white pill, which is at least a little bit of hope. And honestly, I'm feeling more hopeful by the day as I continue to see my fellow Canadians question the mainstream narrative and becoming more and more comfortable speaking out for their own rights and their own desire for freedom. And again, that's because of you guys. As Ron Paul wrote in that essay, the Berlin Wall fell when the citizens decided they had just had enough. And oftentimes when we look back on history, they talk about narratives or regimes crumbling. They first deteriorate slowly and then fast. We may right now be in the fast phase of it. We may still be in the slow phase. We'll find out. Only posterity and hindsight will let us know. But again, appreciate you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow.